Right out of the gate at noon on one of the biggest Supreme Court cases of the year. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joel Brown. Amber has the day off. And we start in Washington. The U.S. Supreme Court late this morning ruling former President Trump may claim immunity from criminal prosecution for some of the actions he took in the waning days of his presidency. Michael Perchik on it for us. He's following the case and breaking it down for us this afternoon. Michael.
Joel, that Supreme Court ruling recognizing former President Donald Trump's immunity claim for official acts as president, though rejected it for unofficial acts. The majority opinion delivered by Chief Justice John Roberts states while the president is not above the law, that he may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers, and he is entitled to at least presumptive prosecution for his official acts.
Hey? Something massive is happening right now in Washington. And honestly, it feels like we're watching the Constitution get stress tested in real time. A federal judge has just triggered a completely new phase in his investigation into whether the Trump administration willfully defied court orders. And at the exact same time, Congress is making moves that have the White House in full panic mode. We're talking about the possibility of criminal contempt proceedings against senior Trump officials. We're talking about impeachment articles being filed and voted on. And we're talking about an administration that is quite literally trying to get a federal judge removed from a case because they don't like the questions he's asking. This isn't some procedural skirmish buried in the legal weeds. This is a full-blown constitutional crisis unfolding before our eyes, and the implications for American democracy, separation of powers, very idea that no one is above the law, are absolutely enormous. Now look, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore to give you the full picture of what's actually going on here. They'll give you the headlines. Sure, they won't connect the dots. They won't tell you what this really means for the balance of power in this country. They won't explain how all of these pieces fit together to create a picture that should alarm every single American regardless of political affiliation. That's why we built this channel, to bring you real stories, real context, no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth, this is your moment. Subscribe, all right? Let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. U.S. District Judge James Bowles, who serves as the chief judge of the federal trial court in Washington, D.C., has been locked in an extraordinary legal battle with the Trump administration since March of this year. The case centers on something that sounds almost unbelievable. Trump administration allegedly ignoring a direct court order to turn around deportation flights that were carrying Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. On March 15th, Judge Boasberg issued what he believed was a clear directive. Those planes needed to be grounded. The administration had invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law that hadn't been used since World War II, to bypass normal immigration procedures and rapidly deport people it claimed were members of a Venezuelan gang called TIRA. But there was a massive problem. Many of these people were being deported without any meaningful hearing, without any opportunity to challenge the government's gang designation, without any of the due process protections that American law supposedly guarantees. And here's what makes the March 15th event so remarkable. Judge Boasberg held an emergency hearing that day because the administration was quite literally rushing to get these planes in the air before a court could stop them. During the hearing, the judge made clear that the deportation flights under the Alien Enemies Act needed to stop. 2 planes were already in the air over international waters when he issued his ruling. The 3rd plane was still on the ground. And yet, according to the evidence that Boasberg has gathered, the administration made a conscious decision to proceed anyway. The 2 planes already airborne continued to El Salvador. And the 3rd plane, it took off after the judge's order, with the administration later claiming that everyone on board was being deported under regular immigration law rather than the Alien Enemies Act. So the order didn't apply. But the judge isn't buying it. He believes the administration was playing games with the law to achieve the result it wanted regardless of what any court said. Nearly 140 Venezuelan men ended up in El Salvador's notorious Sechet mega prison, a facility that human rights organizations have condemned for its brutal conditions. According to evidence that has emerged throughout this case, many of these men were not actually gang members at all. Some have since been returned to Venezuela after El Salvador decided it didn't want them. Others have been fighting in court for months to clear their names. One of them, Kilmer Abrego Garcia, has become a symbol of this entire debacle. The administration itself admitted it made an administrative error with Abrego Garcia, wrongfully deported. Spent months in that prison before being released. Even now, the administration has been trying to retain him, only to be blocked by another federal judge who just this week found that the government affirmatively misled the court about its intentions. Now here's where this gets really interesting and really dangerous. After months of legal wrangling, an appeals court finally cleared the way for Judge Boasberg to resume his criminal contempt investigation. Bike and April Boasberg had made a blockbuster determination. Probable cause exists to find the government in criminal contempt. Think about what that means. A federal chief judge looked at the evidence and concluded there was probable cause to believe the Trump administration committed a crime by defying his orders before he could move forward with determining who was responsible and whether they should face prosecution. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals put the proceedings on hold. For 7 months, the contempt inquiry sat in limbo while the appeals court sorted through various procedural issues. But then, on November 14th, a larger panel of appeals court judges ruled that Boasberg could proceed. The investigation was back on. Judge Boasberg announced that he wanted to hear testimony from witnesses, including a former Justice Department lawyer named Aris Ruveni, who filed a whistleblower complaint making some absolutely explosive allegations. Ruveni was present in meetings as the administration prepared to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. And according to his account, a senior Justice Department official named Emil Bo, who was at the time the number 3 official at DOJ and a former personal lawyer for Donald Trump himself, literally said in a meeting on March 14th that the administration should consider telling the courts. I'm quoting here. F you and ignored any court orders that got in the way of the deportation flights. Let that sink in. Is that a senior DOJ official, someone who had recently been Trump's personal attorney, told colleagues that the administration should be prepared to ignore federal judges. Bove has denied making this statement. But Boasberg wants to hear from Ruveni directly, under oath, to get to the bottom of what actually happened in those. Boasberg also scheduled testimony from Drew Ensign, a current Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Justice Department, who the government has identified as the person who conveyed Boasberg's March 5th orders to the Department of Homeland Security. The judge wants to understand the chain of communication work now. What? When did they know it? Why did the flights proceed anyway? He's also made clear that he may want to hear from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem herself. The government has filed declarations saying Noem was the decision maker who authorized the flights to continue. Noem claims she was acting on legal advice from lawyers at both DHS and the Justice Department. But Boasberg has questioned whether those declarations are complete or accurate, and he believes in-person testimony may be necessary to get the full picture. And this is where the Trump administration's response tells you everything you need to know about how scared they are. On Friday, the Justice Department rushed to a federal appeals court and demanded that Judge Boasberg's contempt hearings be blocked. But they didn't stop there. They're also demanding that Boasberg be removed from the case entirely, accusing him of conducting what they call a radical, retaliatory, unconstitutional campaign against the Trump administration. They're calling his investigation a circus and claiming he has developed too strong a bias to preside over the matter. They're saying the hearings have every appearance of an endless fishing expedition aimed at an ever-widening list of witnesses and prolonged testimony, and that the spectacle is not a genuine effort to uncover any relevant facts. A 3-judge panel on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals agreed to temporarily pause the hearings. The panel was composed of 2 judges nominated by Trump and 1 nominated by President Biden, and they voted 2-1 for what's called an administrative stay, meaning the hearings are on hold, while the court considers the administration's arguments more fully. But let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. The executive branch of the United States government is trying to get a federal judge kicked off a case because that judge is asking uncomfortable questions about whether senior officials broke the law. This isn't a situation where the judge did something procedurally wrong. This isn't a conflict of interest issue. The administration is saying, essentially, that Judge Boasberg is biased because he's taking seriously the possibility that they violated his order. That's not bias. That's a judge doing his job. But here's the problem for the administration. Judge Boasberg isn't backing down even after the appeals courts issued its temporary stay. Boasberg fired back with his own filing, refusing to cancel or delay his proceedings. He wrote something that I think every American needs to hear. This inquiry is not some academic exercise. Approximately 137 men were spirited out of this country without a hearing and placed in a prison in El Salvador, where many suffered abuse and possible torture, despite this court's order that they should not be disembarked. That's a federal judge, a chief federal judge saying in black and white that people may have been tortured because the Trump administration allegedly ignored his orders, and now the administration is trying to shut him up. This is where things become a lot bigger than just one immigration case. Because at the exact same time that Judge Boasberg is pursuing this contempt investigation, Congress has been making its own moves to hold Trump accountable. On December 10th, Representative Al Green of Texas filed articles of impeachment against President Trump. This was the second time this year that Green forced a House vote on impeachment, and while the resolution was ultimately tabled by a vote of 237 to 140, what happened during that vote tells an important. The margin was much narrower than the first time Green tried this back in June. The resolution was rejected by a much wider margin. More Democrats are getting on board. 47 Democrats voted present rather than against the resolution, following the lead of Democratic leadership, which seems to be signaling that while they don't think now is the time for impeachment, they're not ruling it out either. The articles of impeachment focused on 2 deeply disturbing patterns of behavior. First, Trump's calling for the execution of members of Congress. That's not hyperbole. That's literally what happened. In November, 6 Democratic lawmakers who are veterans of the military and intelligence services posted a video urging service members to refuse illegal orders. The lawmakers included Representatives Jason Crow, Chrissy Houlihan, Chris Deluzio, and others. They didn't specify which orders. They reminded service members of their constitutional obligation, their oath, which includes refusing to obey manifestly illegal commands. This is not a radical position. It's what the military has taught for decades. Following orders is not a defense for war crimes. Service members have both a right and a duty to refuse clearly unlawful orders. Trump responded on Truth Social by saying this was seditious behavior at the highest level, and that each of these traitors should be arrested and put on trial. Then, in a follow-up post, he wrote simply, "Seditos be abjure, punishable by death." He also reposted content from supporters who said the lawmakers should be hanged, that their actions were insurrection, and that they should be indicted. The White House later tried to walk this back, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying Trump didn't actually want to execute members of Congress. When she was directly asked at the podium, does the president want to execute members of Congress? She said no. A threat was made in writing by the President of the United States against sitting lawmakers doing their constitutional duties. As Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said on the Senate floor, the President of the United States is calling for the execution of elected officials. This is an outright threat, and it's deadly serious. When Donald Trump uses the language of execution and treason, some of his supporters may very well listen. He is lighting a match in a country soaked with political gasoline. The second article of impeachment addressed something equally disturbing: Trump's sustained attacks on federal judges. Attacks that have created a climate where judges are receiving credible threats of violence. This isn't theoretical. Judges across the country who have ruled against Trump are now operating under heightened security. The attacks on Judge Boasberg have been particularly intense, with Trump himself calling for the judge's impeachment and Republican lawmakers introducing actual impeachment articles against Boasberg in the House. Multiple GOP senators, including Lindsey Graham, have called for Boasberg to be suspended while those articles are pending. They want to sideline a sitting federal judge because his rulings have been inconvenient for the administration. This is an assault on judicial independence that should alarm anyone who cares about the rule of law, regardless of party. And let's not forget that the Trump administration has already arrested one judge this year. Like in April, FBI agents arrested Judge Hannah Dugan, a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge in Wisconsin, on charges that she interfered with an ICE arrest. The charging documents didn't actually indicate that Dugan prevented any arrest from happening. But that didn't stop FBI Director Kash Patel from claiming on social media that she obstructed justice, a post he later deleted. Attorney General Pam Bondi went on Fox News and called Dugan deranged and issued what can only be described as a threat to all judges across the country. We're sending a very strong message today. We will come after you and we will prosecute you. We will find you. That's the Attorney General of the United States telling judges that if they get in the administration's way, they will be arrested. This is unprecedented, authoritarian, and this is exactly the context in which Judge Boasberg's contempt investigation and the congressional impeachment efforts need to be understood. Okay, let's break down what this actually means, because the implications here are absolutely enormous. First, understand that what we're witnessing is not normal. We have a federal judge investigating whether the Trump administration committed criminal contempt by ignoring court orders. And in response, the administration is trying to get that judge removed. They're claiming bias, they're claiming retaliation, they're claiming the investigation is unconstitutional. But think about what that means for the rule of law. If the executive branch can simply demand that any judge who rules against them or investigates them be removed from cases, then judicial independence is finished. The courts become nothing more than rubber stamps for whoever holds power. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism with extra steps. Second, the whistleblower allegations are absolutely damning if they're true. And Boasberg clearly thinks they're serious enough to warrant investigation. The claim that a senior DOJ official literally said the administration should ignore court orders goes to the heart of constitutional government. We have a system of checks and balances specifically to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. The judiciary exists to interpret the law and ensure that the executive and legislative branches stay within constitutional bounds. The executive can simply ignore court orders it doesn't like, then the judiciary has no power, and we're left with one branch of government able to do whatever it wants. That's the definition of tyranny. Third, the administration's response to this investigation has been telling rather than cooperate, rather than provide the information Boasberg is asking for. They've stonewalled at every turn, they've claimed privilege, they've tried to limit testimony. They've filed cursory declarations that leave more questions than answers. Now they're trying to get the judge removed entirely. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has filed a declaration saying she was the decision maker who authorized the flights to continue, but she's claiming she was acting on legal advice. The lawyers who allegedly provided that advice are hiding behind attorney-client privilege. It's a classic cover-up strategy. Point fingers at each other while simultaneously preventing anyone from getting to the truth. If they really did nothing wrong, if they really acted in good faith based on legitimate legal advice, why not let Reveni and Ensign testify? Why not let Noem take questions under oath? The answer is obvious. They're afraid of what might come out. Fourth, and this is crucial, the Supreme Court's previous ruling in this case doesn't actually protect the administration the way they claim it does. The Supreme Court ruled that Boasberg didn't have jurisdiction over the flights themselves, meaning he couldn't order the planes turned around. But Boasberg has correctly noted that this doesn't cancel out his authority to investigate whether his orders were intentionally defied. This is a basic principle of law. Even if a court order is later invalidated, defying it while it's in effect can still constitute contempt. You can't just ignore a judge because you think you might win on appeal. You can't decide for yourself which court orders apply to you and which don't. That's not how the law works. Anarchy. Fifth, let's talk about the political implications here because they're massive. The House just voted on impeachment. And while the resolution was tabled, the dynamics are shifting. Republicans have a narrow majority in the House, but that majority is getting smaller. Several GOP lawmakers have started pushing back against Trump on various issues. Tariffs to Ukraine policy, to the Epstein files. Stieswijk, Republican state senators in Indiana, voted to reject Trump's pressure to redraw their congressional map in a way that would benefit the GOP. 20 House Republicans voted against Trump's preferred position on another issue. Former Senator Jeff Flake, who left Congress in part because he refused to unconditionally back Trump, has noted that the fear of what Trump could do to lawmakers electorally is diminishing. Republicans performed poorly in off-year elections last month. Trump's approval rating is declining. The calculus that has kept Republicans in line is starting to change. Sixth, the Supreme Court itself is about to become even more central to this. The justices have agreed to hear a case about Trump's tariffs, which could determine whether the president can unilaterally impose massive economic penalties without congressional approval. They're also hearing arguments in a case about whether Trump can fire members of independent agencies at will, which could overturn a 90-year-old precedent and fundamentally reshape the structure of government. During oral arguments this week, the court appeared poised to side with Trump, conservative justices suggesting that the precedent limiting presidential removal power is outdated. If the court rules that Trump can fire anyone in the executive branch for any reason, it will give this president and future presidents unprecedented control over agencies that Congress designed to be independent. The Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Reserve, the Merit Systems Protection Board, all of them could become tools of presidential power rather than independent checks on it. Seventh, think about what this looks like to the rest of the world. America's allies are watching a president threaten members of Congress with execution, attack the judiciary, potentially defy court orders with impunity. European leaders are already deeply skeptical of American reliability. After everything that's happened with Ukraine and NATO, Senator Don Bacon, a Nebraska Republican, has been one of the few GOP lawmakers willing to criticize Trump's approach to Russia. Halini to velvet-gloved, red carpet treatment for Putin while Ukraine gets condescending. Boorish behavior. Market volatility has been driven in part by uncertainty about American institutions and whether they can still function. When the President of the United States appears to be above the law, when judges can be threatened and removed for doing their jobs, when members of Congress can be threatened with death for exercising their constitutional duties, that sends a message to every autocrat and authoritarian around the world that democracy is weak. That institutions don't matter. That power is all that counts. Eighth, consider the human cost. Judge Boasberg has been crystal clear about this. Approximately 1 human beings were sent to a prison in El Salvador where they suffered abuse and possible torture. Many of them may not have been gang members at all. The administration made a gang designation, used an 18th century wartime law to bypass their rights, and shipped them out of the country before any court could meaningfully intervene. One of them, Kilmer Abrego Garcia, has become a symbol of this case. He was wrongfully deported. The administration admitted it'd been error. He spent months in that prison. And even after being released and returned to the United States, the administration has been trying to re-detain him. This week, Judge Polishini's in Maryland blocked the government from re-arresting Abrego Garcia at an ICE check-in, ruling that the administration lacked the legal authority to continue holding him. She found that the government affirmatively misled the court about its plans, that Costa Rica had never actually withdrawn its offer to receive Abrego Garcia as the administration had claimed. This is a pattern, misleading courts, ignoring orders, trying to achieve through speed and deception what they can achieve through law. Ninth, the attacks on Congress deserve just as much attention as the attacks on the judiciary. This administration has made clear it will go after anyone who stands in its way. Back in May, the Department of Homeland Security threatened to arrest Democratic members of Congress who visited an ICE detention facility in Newark, New Jersey. Representatives Bonnie Watson, Coleman, Rob Mann and LaMonica McKeever went to Delaney Hall to conduct oversight, as members of Congress routinely do at federal facilities. Confrontation with ICE officers. Newark Mayor Ras Baraka, who was also there, was arrested. DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin went on CNN and said there would likely be more arrests coming, accusing the lawmakers of assaulting officers. The members of Congress say they were the ones. The threat to arrest sitting federal legislators for exercising their oversight authority is an attack on the separation of powers. Pure and simple. And then there's Trump's explicit call for the arrest and execution of the 6 lawmakers who made the military video. These are veterans. These are people who served their country in uniform. Representative Jason Crow is a former Army Ranger who deployed to Iraq. And the President of the United States said he should be arrested and put on trial for treason, which is punishable by death. Even after the White House tried to walk it back, the message was clear. Cross this president and you become a target. Stand up for the Constitution, might be labeled a traitor. This is the climate we're now living in. This is the new normal that the Trump administration has created. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this story is far from over. The Circuit Court of Appeals has temporarily paused Boasberg's contempt hearings. This is only an administrative stay, not a ruling on the merits. The appeals court still needs to decide whether to actually block the hearings or allow them to proceed. The stay will last until the court can more fully consider the issues. Judges put it, given that 2 of the 3 judges on the panel were Trump appointees. The administration may feel confident. But even Trump-appointed judges have sometimes drawn lines when it comes to the most egregious executive overreach. The question is whether this panel will do the same, or whether they'll provide cover for an administration that appears to believe it can ignore courts at will. The appeals court allows the hearings to go forward. We can see explosive testimony from Erez Raveni about what senior DOJ officials allegedly said about ignoring court orders. We could see Drew Ensign forced to testify about what information was conveyed to the Department of Homeland Security on March 15th. We could see Judge Boasberg make findings about who was responsible for the decision to continue the flight. And if those findings support a criminal contempt referral, we enter entirely uncharted territory. Criminal contempt charges against cabinet officials or other senior government officers would be unprecedented in modern American history. The mechanics of how such charges would be prosecuted are themselves unclear, since the Justice Department would normally handle such matters but can hardly be expected to prosecute its own. Boasberg might need to appoint a special prosecutor. This could become one of the most significant separation of powers cases in decades. Meanwhile, the impeachment machinery remains in motion. Representative Al Green has made clear he will continue to bring articles of impeachment as long as he's in Congress. He filed multiple resolutions this year, each targeting different aspects of Trump's conduct. The Iran strikes that bypassed Congress, the threats against lawmakers, the attacks on judicial independence. Margins are getting closer. Democrats are increasingly willing to go on record against Trump. Democratic leadership, including Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Pete Aguilar, voted present rather than against the latest resolution, a signal that they're keeping the door open. And looking ahead to 2026, if Democrats retake the House, real investigations with subpoena power become possible, real hearings, real accountability. The various legal challenges to Trump administration policies are stacking up across the federal judiciary. According to one tracker, more than 700 cases have been filed challenging administration actions, with hundreds of judges ruling against the government on issues from immigration dissension to government reorganization to National Guard deployments. And speaking of the National Guard, let's not forget what's happening there. Tuesday's week, Judge Charles Breyer in San Francisco ordered the administration to end its deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles and return control of the troops to Governor Gavin Newsom. The judge called the deployment profoundly un-American, noting that the administration's justification that protests against ICE raids required military intervention didn't hold up. The National Guard is supposed to be for genuine emergencies, invasions, rebellions, situations where regular law enforcement is completely unable to function. It was never meant to be a tool for presidents to deploy military force in cities that happen to have Democratic mayors. That's exactly what Trump has been doing, sending troops to Los Angeles, Chicago, Portland, threatening deployments in New York, Baltimore, New Orleans. Almost every deployment is now tied up in court. The Supreme Court itself is weighing the Chicago case. The administration keeps losing, and it keeps trying to find new ways around the rulings. So here's the bottom line. We are in the middle of something historic. The outcome is genuinely uncertain. Judge James Boasberg has triggered a new phase in his investigation that could lead to criminal charges against senior Trump officials for defying a court order. At the exact same time, Congress is moving forward with impeachment. Even if they're unlikely to succeed in a Republican-controlled House, the Trump administration is responding not by cooperating, not by explaining their actions, but by trying to silence the judge who's asking questions. They're calling his investigation a circus, accusing him of bias, and demanding his removal. They're claiming executive privilege to prevent testimony. They're doing everything they can to avoid accountability. Meanwhile, The attacks on members of Congress continue. The threats against judges continue. The administration has arrested a state judge, threatened to arrest federal lawmakers, and explicitly called for sitting members of Congress to be executed for treason. Not politics as usual. This is not normal partisan conflict. This is an assault on the basic institutions of American democracy. The courts that check executive power, the legislators who represent the people, the Constitution itself that establishes a government of laws and not of men. This is what a constitutional crisis looks like. Not a single dramatic moment, but a slow erosion of norms, a gradual breaking down of the guardrails that keep power in check. When the president can threaten lawmakers with execution and face no consequences. When the administration can allegedly ignore court orders and then try to remove the judge investigating them. When whistleblowers who come forward are fired and attacked, then we're no longer operating under the rule of law. We're operating under the rule of whoever has the most power and is willing to use it most aggressively. If that sounds alarming, good. It should be alarming. Because the alternative to taking this seriously is waking up one day to discover that the institutions we relied on to protect our rights have been hollowed out from the inside. The next few weeks are going to be critical. Watch what happens with the appeals court. Watch whether Boasberg's hearings proceed. Watch how Republicans in Congress respond to ongoing revelations about administration conduct. Watch the 2026 elections, which are now less than 11 months away and could determine whether any of this ever results in real accountability. The story of American democracy in 2025 is being written right now. Every single one of us has a stake in how it ends. Keep your eyes on this, because what happens next could define the next decade of American politics, maybe much longer than that. Not normal. This is not okay. And no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you should be paying attention to what's unfolding in our courts and our Congress right now. Because the fundamental question being decided is whether anyone in America, including the president, is truly subject to the law. That's the question at the heart of all of this. And how we answer it will determine what kind of country we're going to be.